I was living alone in an apartment in Fort Collins, Colorado. I was 24 at the time and had recently gotten into a relationship with a girl named Alyssa, whom I met through a mutual friend at a local coffee shop. She was sweet, quiet, and attractive in a mysterious sort of way. Everything started out normal enough. We hung out regularly, watched movies, went hiking in the foothills, typical dating stuff. But after a few months, things started feeling off. Alyssa always seemed very private about her past. She was reluctant to introduce me to her friends or family, claiming she didn't really talk to them anymore. At first I didn't think much about it. I figured maybe she had family issues, something private she didn't want to discuss yet. I respected her privacy and let it go for a while, but gradually her behavior began to unsettle me. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking, an intense, unreadable expression on her face. I'd laugh it off, but something about her gaze never felt quite right. She started showing up at my apartment randomly, sometimes late at night, without calling or texting. First I'd find her just sitting in her car, parked outside, waiting quietly, until I noticed her. When I asked why she didn't call first, she'd shrug and say she liked surprising me, but the surprises weren't cute, they were becoming unnerving. One night I woke up at around 3 a.m. feeling restless, unable to sleep. I got up to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. When I passed by my front window, something caught my eye. Alyssa's car was parked outside across the street, lights off, engine off, just quietly sitting there. I squinted into the darkness and could barely make out her silhouette behind the steering wheel, staring directly toward my window. I immediately felt uneasy. My gut told me something wasn't right, but again I convinced myself she was just overly attached. I went back to bed telling myself I'd talk to her about boundaries the next day. The next afternoon, when I brought it up casually, she seemed unfazed, almost amused. She brushed it off as simply missing me, and I let it slide. Again, despite my growing discomfort, things escalated quickly after that. A week later, I came home from work to find her sitting on the stairs outside my apartment door. She looked tense, nervous. Even before I could ask why she was there, she stood up abruptly and insisted I needed to come with her immediately. She told me it was important, but wouldn't explain further, just kept urging me toward her car parked at the curb. My instincts screamed at me to stay put, but I hesitated, confused. Alyssa had never acted this frantic before. Still, something told me not to get in that car when I firmly said I wasn't going anywhere until she explained what was going on. Her expression changed from nervousness to quiet anger. Without another word, she turned and quickly walked away, climbing into her car and speeding off without looking back. Shaken, I went inside and locked my door, wondering what had just happened. After that bizarre encounter, I finally admitted to myself that I needed some space from Melissa, but before I could bring it up to her, I received a strange text message from an unknown number. 2 days later, it simply said, "Stay away from Alyssa, she's not who you think she is." My heart began pounding. I immediately replied asking who it was, but I never received a response. Feeling increasingly anxious, I tried calling Alyssa, but her phone went straight to voicemail. That night, anxiety kept me awake again. Around 2 a.m., lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard footsteps quietly approaching my apartment door. My body froze, senses on high alert. I listened carefully as someone gently tested my doorknob, trying to open it. When they realized it was locked, they quietly stepped away. I crept carefully to the window and peered through the blinds just in time to see Alyssa hurriedly slipping into a car parked a block down, where 2 other figures waited inside. A cold dread set in. I spent the following morning searching online, desperate for answers. I began digging through Alyssa's social media pages, which I'd never really looked at closely before. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary, but when I searched her name more thoroughly, I found something disturbing buried in an old news article from Nebraska dated 2 years earlier. Alyssa wasn't her real name, it was Leah. The article described the arrest of a kidnapping ring that targeted young adults around the Omaha area, luring victims into cars using young women as bait. Leah's picture was there, clearly recognizable despite different hair color and style. She had been arrested but released due to insufficient evidence. The gang had since relocated, and Leah, now calling herself Alyssa, had somehow made her way to Colorado. My blood ran cold as I realized just how close I'd come to becoming their next victim. Panic rose in me, and I immediately called the Fort Collins police, telling them everything I'd Discovered they took a report promising they'd look into it, and advised me to be cautious, lock my doors, and avoid contact with her. For the next few days I barely slept, constantly watching out the window. Feeling unsafe even in my own apartment, I didn't see Alyssa or her car again, and eventually my anxiety eased slightly, but just as I began to think it was over, another message arrived from a different, unknown number. You shouldn't have told the police. Big mistake. My stomach turned that night. I packed some clothes and drove to stay with a friend in Loveland, not wanting to spend another night in my apartment alone, but even there I didn't feel safe. Every time headlights swept past the windows, I froze, convinced they'd found me. I never heard directly from Alyssa again, but months later I read another news story, this time local to Fort Collins, about the arrest of 3 individuals connected to a kidnapping attempt involving a college student. Leah's name and photo were there once again, along with 2 men I'd never seen before. They had attempted to abduct someone not far from where I used to live, but this time a witness had intervened and police arrived in time. But the most chilling part was in the police report. They had searched the suspects' phones and found pictures of several people, all apparently targets, along with addresses and personal details. My name was on that list. They'd been planning this for weeks. I moved out of Colorado shortly afterward, needing a fresh start somewhere far away, but even now, a year later, in a small town in Idaho, I find myself double-checking locks and glancing nervously over my shoulder whenever I'm out alone at night. I constantly question people's intentions, never fully trusting anyone new I meet, because the truth is, even though Leah or Alyssa or whatever she called herself is behind bars now, the terror of knowing I was moments away from vanishing without a trace has never faded. This incident happened to my mom when she was 19 years old. She worked at a small PCO and STD call office, a tiny place that didn't require many employees. Her boss had his main office connected to the PCO where several employees worked because his main business was real estate. My mom mostly worked alone and started this job during her college vacation. Her shift began in the morning and ended in the evening around 5 or 6 p.m. One day while she was in the office, a man walked in. He looked like he was in his late 50s with white hair and a white beard, and was wearing a navy blue shirt. The office had a glass front so you could see in and out. The man came in to use the PCO. After his call, he came up to my mom's desk and started making small talk. He asked if she was related to the boss, and when she said no, he began complimenting her, saying she was very beautiful and seemed educated. He then mentioned that she didn't need to work in such a small office, and claimed he could easily get her a job at a popular bank nearby as he had some connections there. He introduced himself and told her to bring her resume to his home to discuss her education and job prospects. Further, my mom felt uneasy about going to his house, but he mentioned his sick father and a servant who took care of the house and his father. He claimed his house was right across the road in a relatively new building where mostly wealthy people lived. Trusting him, she agreed to meet him after her shift ended. Before leaving, he gave her his telephone number and advised her not to tell anyone at the office about their conversation. This seemed reasonable to my mom, as she didn't want her boss to think she was planning to leave that evening. After her shift, my mom crossed the road and entered the building compound to meet the man. She saw him standing next to a middle-aged woman with 2 kids in school uniforms, likely just back from school. At first she wasn't sure if it was the same man because his hair and beard were now dyed black and he was wearing a t-shirt, but then he waved at my mom when he noticed her. The man introduced my mom to the woman, and their interaction seemed very friendly, making my mom think the woman was his wife and the kids were his. They walked inside the building and the man asked my mom to follow them. They all got into the elevator together, and while the man pressed the button for his floor, my mom didn't notice which button the woman pressed. When the elevator stopped on the 5th or 4th floor, the woman and the kids got out. My mom thought this was their floor and started to step out too, but the woman chuckled and told her it wasn't. The man remained inside the elevator, and my mom realized the woman wasn't his wife, so she quickly got back inside. In the elevator, the man mentioned he worked in Dubai and mostly stayed out of the country because of his job. When they finally reached the 9th floor where the man lived, he stepped out first, and my mom followed. She saw 2 or 3 kids playing in the square-shaped corridor with 2 doors on either side and the elevator and staircase in the middle. The man walked to the door closest to the elevator, unlocked it, and invited my mom inside. She noticed the Kids still playing in the corridor. Inside the living room was clean with white walls, an L-shaped sofa, a TVA. Teapot with a cold drink bottle, and a packet of hair dye with a brush as if he had just colored his hair. The man asked if she minded him closing the door, but my mom, while being respectful, asked him to keep it open. He complied. He then offered to show her the house before discussing the job. She agreed, and he led her through a doorway beside the sofa into a small passage. My mom noticed that all the lights in the house were off except for the living room. The man opened a door on the left, saying, "This is the bedroom." She peeked inside and saw a dark room with closed windows and a bed, but she also saw something that looked like a camera stand in front of the bed, which made her feel uneasy. She didn't see his father or the servant he mentioned when she asked about his father. He told her that he was out to see the doctor with the servant, which was strange because if he knew his dad wouldn't be around that evening, why did he tell my mom? Otherwise feeling scared, she suggested they discuss the job now and walked back to the living room without completing the house tour. The man brought a chair from inside and sat in front of her. He asked my mom if she would like to have the cold drink that was in the teapot. She said no, but he insisted and went inside with the cold drink bottle, maybe to the kitchen, while still talking about random stuff like whether my mom liked his house. He came out with 2 glasses of cold drink in his hands and asked my mom to have them. She took the glass but did not drink from it. He even asked her to take a sip, but she said she would drink it later, which she never did. After that, he started talking about his job in Dubai, where he claimed to live in a much bigger flat. He mentioned how strict the laws were there, but my mom wasn't paying much attention. She was still trying to process the situation and her growing unease. Suddenly, while talking about Dubai, he grabbed my mom's hand to demonstrate how they would cut off a thief's arm. This unnecessary touch scared her, and she realized she was in danger. She prayed silently for a way out. The man stood up and moved towards the door while talking about his Dubai flat's automatic door. My mom wanted to leave, but he was standing close to the door ready to close it if she tried to escape, and the kids wouldn't have noticed because they were so busy playing, and also they were just kids at that moment. She realized she had made a huge mistake by coming to this man's place, but she thought it was too late now. But then something unexpected happened. The 2 closed doors on the other side of the corridor opened, and 2 women, probably the mothers of the kids playing outside, stepped out and started calling their children when they noticed each other. They stepped out of their doorsteps and began chatting near the man's door. This distraction gave my mom a chance to escape because the woman caught the man off guard, and maybe they saw my mom too. She quickly stepped out of the flat saying, "I am getting late and I need to get home on time or my mom will kill me." She didn't even wait for the elevator and took the stairs instead. The man tried to stop her, but she told him she would meet him the next day, which was a lie. When my mom finally reached home, she decided not to escalate the situation and kept it to herself. The next day she was scared to go to work, but did. Her boss, who usually stayed in his cabin, unexpectedly came to her and asked if she had met the man from the day before. She admitted she had, and he asked if the man did anything inappropriate. She said no. After a few more questions, her boss warned her to stay away from him, saying he was not a nice man and she shouldn't go with him or visit his place. My mom agreed. She still doesn't know how her boss knew about the incident or if he knew the man personally. Nothing unusual happened during her shift, but later as she was returning home, she saw the man standing outside his building, seemingly waiting for her. She managed to avoid him, but he noticed her and sent his servant to stop her because he was not fast enough. The servant tried to convince her to talk to the man again, but my mom refused and got into a taxi. She decided to leave the job since her vacation was ending soon anyway. A few years later, she read in the newspaper about an old man in his 60s arrested in another city for drugging and sexually assaulting a girl. He had a history of similar crimes, including inappropriately recording his victims to blackmail them. It was the same man. When she realized that all his victims were my mom's age, early 20s, she was terrified but never told anyone until after she married my dad. She shared this story with me just last year, still considering herself lucky that those women appeared that day, saving her from a similar fate. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. Your support means the world to us, so please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks, this story happened to me and my sister Jessica 20 years ago, and I am only telling it because she passed away recently, so I'm doing this in her memory. 2 years after my parents divorced, I finally decided to leave my mother's house and move in with my dad and sister. In rural southern Maine, my father owned a large piece of land surrounded by thick forests. The house itself was a 2-story building with a basement attic and a beautiful wraparound porch. Despite its size and charm, it had been designed specifically for my stepmother, a deeply unpleasant person who tormented us throughout our childhood, mostly through psychological cruelty and occasional physical punishments. For years, visits to that house were dreaded events marked by anxiety. Thankfully, my dad divorced my stepmother during my junior year of high school. My sister immediately chose to move in with him after their separation. I decided to wait until I graduated before joining them. Initially, I believed the house would feel different without my stepmother around, but I quickly realized something was still very wrong. My bedroom was situated next to my sister's room on the 2nd floor. My sister's room was the only access to the attic, a dark, unfinished space we seldom entered. Not long after settling in, we started hearing strange noises from up there at night. Initially, it sounded like small, hurried footsteps scampering across the attic floor. My sister and I often joked nervously about the gnomes, blaming the odd noises on imaginary creatures. When we told our dad, he dismissed our worries, assuring us it was probably just rats or squirrels. However, as weeks passed, the activity grew more frequent and more troubling. At first, it was just the footsteps. Soon after, doors began opening randomly throughout the house, seemingly without explanation. There were nights when I'd be reading or watching TV in the living room and suddenly hear a faint creak followed by the slow squeak of a door swinging open upstairs. Every time I checked, I'd find an empty hallway and no explanation for the open doors. One particular evening is forever etched in my memory. My sister and I were sitting downstairs watching TV together. Around midnight, she yawned and decided it was time for bed. I was too engrossed in a late-night show, so I stayed behind on the couch. About 10 minutes after she went upstairs, I clearly heard footsteps descending slowly down the staircase. Thinking my sister had forgotten something, I didn't pay much attention at first, but then I heard the basement door open. Confused, I stood up and walked toward the hallway. Standing at the top of the dark basement stairs, I called out to see if my sister needed anything. Silence was my only answer. My heart beat a bit faster as I leaned forward, flipping the switch for the basement lights. The stairs illuminated, but nobody was there. Feeling uneasy, I quickly closed the basement door and double-checked that it was latched securely. Now unsettled, I decided it was best to just head upstairs and try to get some sleep. My bedroom door had always been a bit tricky. Settling had caused it to pinch against the frame. It required a good tug or push to open or close fully. That night, I made sure to pull the door tight and secure it shut before climbing into bed. I left my window slightly open to let in the cool evening air, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. A little past 1 o'clock in the morning, I was startled awake by footsteps again. This time they were louder and moved quickly up the wooden staircase. I sat frozen, listening as they moved down the hallway toward my sister's room. Her door creaked open loudly, then slammed shut. Moments later, my heart raced, and I felt a wave of fear rush over me. Suddenly, the footsteps hurried back toward my room, and I braced myself. To my horror, something or someone slammed forcefully into my door, rattling it violently against its stubborn frame. Terrified, I jumped out of bed, standing frozen, breathless with panic. The footsteps swiftly retreated, rushing back toward my sister's room. I heard her attic door open forcefully, followed by hurried steps running up into the attic. My eyes widened as the footsteps raced across the attic floor directly above me toward the small attic window overlooking the roof of the wraparound porch. Then a loud, heavy thud echoed from outside, as if someone or something had landed heavily on the porch roof. Shaking with fear, I ran quickly to my window, slammed it shut, and locked it securely. Peering desperately out into the dark, I saw nothing, just darkness and moonlight reflecting eerily off the porch shingles. A few seconds later, I heard my sister's shaky voice at my door. "Are you messing with me?" she said anxiously. I opened my door quickly, relieved to see her standing there but shaken. "No, are you messing with me?" I replied, voice trembling. She shook her head rapidly. She told me the violent banging on my door had jolted her awake. Afterward, she'd heard her bedroom door and attic door open rapidly, followed by the running footsteps. Terrified, she'd stayed hidden under her blankets, afraid to move, until it had finally gone quiet again. Neither of us could sleep that night. Instead, we sat together on my bed, anxiously waiting for sunrise the next day. We confronted our dad, but again he brushed it off, still convinced it was animals and old house noises. Frustrated but determined, we took matters into our own hands, installing a sturdy lock on the attic door. From that day on, we both began locking our bedroom doors every night, and I stopped opening my window after dark entirely. After that terrifying night, the activity gradually faded. We occasionally still heard strange creaks or faint footsteps in the attic, but nothing nearly as violent or frightening ever happened again. Yet the sense of unease lingered, always reminding us of what we'd experienced. Both my sister and I felt watched whenever we were home alone, especially after dark. About a year later, our dad announced he planned to sell the house. My sister and I couldn't have been happier. Despite loving the spacious property, neither of us felt safe there anymore. Eventually, a young family purchased it, seemingly unaware of its strange history. We packed up quickly, relieved to move forward and start fresh. Our new home was closer to town, a smaller and simpler house. From the very first night, the difference was clear. It was peaceful, quiet, and entirely free from strange occurrences. No more unexplained footsteps, no more doors opening by themselves. Life slowly returned to normal, and we began sleeping soundly again. Years later, out of curiosity, I mentioned our experiences to a neighbor who had lived near our old house for decades. She hesitated at first, but finally revealed that before my father bought the property, the land had once belonged to a troubled old woman known locally for her reclusive behavior. She'd reportedly been unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and had died mysteriously decades earlier, alone in the old cottage originally built there. Locals had always whispered that her ghost lingered in the area, though my father had dismissed such stories as nonsense when he purchased the land. Today, the memories still send chills through me whenever I recall that night. My sister and I rarely talk about it, preferring to leave it buried in the past. I started babysitting for the Morales family in Denver, Colorado back in February of 2020. At the time, I was juggling a part-time administrative job at a small logistics company in Lakewood. My boss, Mark, was honestly one of the nicest people I'd ever worked for. He always let me clock out early if I needed to pick up groceries, never questioned my lunch breaks, and even surprised me with coffee some mornings. It was one of those workplaces where I actually felt appreciated, which was a relief because I'd had some stressful jobs in the past. With Mark being so understanding about flexible hours, I decided to take on additional work as a babysitter. I figured I could use the extra cash to help pay off some of my student loans. That's how I ended up working for Mr. Morales a couple of nights a week. He was a single father named Jonathan. His wife had passed away a year earlier in a car accident, which left him raising his 4-year-old daughter Bella on his own. He put in long hours at an IT firm downtown and needed someone reliable to watch Bella when he worked late. Bella was a bright, inquisitive little girl who loved coloring books and her stuffed animals. She had an impressive vocabulary for a 4-year-old and was always asking me questions about anything and everything. Whenever I arrived, she'd run up to me with a big smile, excited to show me her latest drawing or ask if we could bake cookies. On this particular night, March 4th, if my memory serves me right, Jonathan had a big project at work. He apologized as he rushed out the door around 6 p.m., saying he probably wouldn't be back until after midnight. I told him not to worry, I'd make sure Bella had dinner and got to bed on time. We spent the evening, as we usually did, coloring pictures of animals, playing with her blocks, and watching a short kids show before bed. Bella seemed extra affectionate, climbing onto my lap and asking for hugs. I chalked it up to her missing her dad, or maybe even her mom, though she didn't talk about that much. After her nighttime bath around 8:30, I brought her up to her room, which was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Bella kept yawning, so I tucked her in, read her a quick story, and told her good night. Half an hour later, I was settled in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, when Bella called out from upstairs. I heard her little voice echo down the hall, so I set the remote aside and went to check on her. She was standing by the window, pointing at the glass. "Bella, what's wrong?" I asked gently. She looked up at me, her expression anxious. "There was a man outside," she said in a trembling voice. "He was staring at me through the window." I tried to reassure her. "Honey, there's no one there," I said, taking a quick peek outside. The backyard was dimly lit by a single motion-activated light, and I didn't see a soul. We were in a pretty quiet neighborhood, mostly middle-class families, well-kept lawns, not the sort of place where people loitered in backyards. Bella still looked terrified though, so I walked her back to her bed and reminded her it was time to sleep. I promised to take a better look in a minute. She insisted I closed the curtains all the way, and after I did, she finally lay back down. I went back downstairs a little uneasy. Bella wasn't the type to invent scary stories for attention, but I figured maybe she saw a shadow or got spooked by a stray cat or something. To ease my nerves, I double-checked the front and back doors, making sure they were locked. Then I sat on the sofa with the TV volume low, trying not to worry. Less than 15 minutes later, I heard Bella crying upstairs. It wasn't the usual whimper or fuss you get from a child. It was a frightened, urgent cry. My heart pounded as I sprinted up the stairs, nearly tripping on the top step. I found her wide-eyed, tear-streaked, sitting up in bed. She managed to say between sobs, "He's back, he's looking at me." Glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of the outside was still visible where the drapes didn't fully meet. Everything looked dark, and still I tried to keep calm for Bella's sake, but my hands were already trembling. If she was this frightened, something had definitely scared her. I hugged her, whispered it was going to be okay, and laid her back down. Then, in a sudden burst of worry and maybe a bit of anger, I decided to do a quick check around the outside of the house. If someone was messing around, I wanted them gone. I grabbed a kitchen knife, probably an overreaction, but in that moment it felt necessary. Pushing open the back door, I stepped out into the cold. My breath came out in white puffs. The yard was silent. The tall fence surrounding the property, the motion sensor light, blinked on, revealing nothing but a few scattered toys on the grass and a slight breeze rustling the tree branches. I walked around the side of the house, checked the windows, the driveway, even looked behind the trash bins. Still nothing. Relieved but still on edge, I came back in through the back door, locking it behind me. Just as I turned the deadbolt, I heard a loud rattle on the front door. It was like someone was jiggling the handle, trying to get in. My heart slammed against my chest. I rushed to the living room to look through the peephole. The hallway light was off, so I had to squint. There he was, a tall man, maybe in his 40s, wearing dirty jeans and a stained hoodie. His face was partially turned away, but I could see enough to notice that his hair was matted and his eyes were wide with a kind of frantic energy. It felt like time slowed down. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. He started banging on the door, rocking it on its hinges. I could almost hear Bella's shaky breathing upstairs, even though she had to be half a hallway away. I swallowed hard and yelled through the door that I was calling the police if he didn't leave immediately. The banging stopped. Silence for a second. Then, to my absolute horror, he tried turning the handle again, using more force. I scrambled for my phone in my back pocket. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. My voice shook when I explained the situation to the operator. She told me to stay calm and stay on the line while officers were dispatched. The man must have heard me say police, because he suddenly darted away from the door. I stayed on the call, locked in place, not daring to move. Within minutes, though it felt like forever, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car through the window. By the time the officers came knocking, my hands were shaking so bad I struggled to pull back the deadbolt. When I finally let them in, Bella ran downstairs sobbing into my leg. The police did a thorough search of the yard. One officer eventually shouted that he found someone crouched under a thick patch of bushes near the fence. The man was half hiding, half curled up, glaring at them with a confused expression. They handcuffed him while he mumbled incoherently. I watched from the doorstep, clutching Bella to me, torn between fear and a kind of relief. After they arrested the intruder, one of the officers took my statement. He seemed genuinely sympathetic. Then he told me something that made my stomach twist. The man had escaped from a mental health facility earlier that day, just a few miles away. Apparently he was considered dangerous due to his unpredictable behavior, though he'd never used a weapon before. They were still trying to piece together how he'd ended up in Jonathan's neighborhood. Jonathan got home about and figured I could use the extra cash to help pay off some of my student loans. That's how I ended up working for Mr. Morales a couple of nights a week. He was a single father named Jonathan. His wife had passed away a year earlier in a car accident, which left him raising his 4-year-old daughter Bella on his own. He put in long hours at an IT firm downtown, and needed someone reliable to watch Bella when he worked late. Bella was a bright, inquisitive little girl who loved coloring books, and her stuffed animals. She had an impressive vocabulary for a 4-year-old, and was always asking me questions about anything and everything. Whenever I arrived, she'd run up to me with a big smile, excited to show me her latest drawing or ask if we could bake cookies on this particular night, March 4th, if my memory serves me right. Jonathan had a big project at work. He apologized as he rushed out the door around 6 p.m., saying he probably wouldn't be back until after midnight. I told him not to worry, I'd make sure Bella had dinner and got to bed on time. We spent the evening, as we usually did, coloring pictures of animals, playing with her blocks, and watching a short kids show before bed. Bella seemed extra affectionate, climbing onto my lap and asking for hugs. I chalked it up to her missing her dad, or maybe even her mom, though she didn't talk about that much. After her nighttime bath around 8:30, I brought her up to her room, which was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Bella kept yawning, so I tucked her in, read her a quick story, and told her good night. Half an hour later, I was settled in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, when Bella called out from upstairs. I heard her little voice echo down the hall, so I set the remote aside and went to check on her. She was standing by the window, pointing at the glass. "Bella, what's wrong?" I asked gently. She looked up at me, her expression anxious. "There was a man outside," she said in a trembling voice. "He was staring at me through the window." I tried to reassure her. "Honey, there's no one there," I said, taking a quick peek outside. The backyard was dimly lit by a single motion-activated light, and I didn't see a soul. We were in a pretty quiet neighborhood, mostly middle-class families, well-kept lawns, not the sort of place where people loitered in backyards. Bella still looked terrified though, so I walked her back to her bed and reminded her it was time to sleep. I promised to take a better look in a minute. She insisted I close the curtains all the way, and after I did, she finally lay back down. I went back downstairs, a little uneasy. Bella wasn't the type to invent scary stories for attention, but I figured maybe she saw a shadow or got spooked by a stray cat or something. To ease my nerves, I double-checked the front and back doors, making sure they were locked. Then I sat on the sofa with the TV volume low, trying not to worry. Less than 15 minutes later, I heard Bella crying upstairs. It wasn't the usual whimper or fuss you get from a child. It was a frightened, urgent cry. My heart pounded as I sprinted up the stairs, nearly tripping on the top step. I found her wide-eyed, tear-streaked, sitting up in bed. She managed to say between sobs, "He's back, he's looking at me." Glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of the outside was still visible where the drapes didn't fully meet. Everything looked dark, and still I tried to keep calm for Bella's sake, but my hands were already trembling. If she was this frightened, something had definitely scared her. I hugged her, whispered it was going to be okay, and laid her back down. Then, in a sudden burst of worry and maybe a bit of anger, I decided to do a quick check around the outside of the house. If someone was messing around, I wanted them gone. I grabbed a kitchen knife, probably an overreaction, but in that moment it felt necessary. Pushing open the back door, I stepped out into the cold. My breath came out in white puffs. The yard was silent. The tall fence surrounding the property, the motion sensor light, blinked on, revealing nothing but a few scattered toys on the grass and a slight breeze rustling the tree branches. I walked around the side of the house, checked the windows, the driveway, even looked behind the trash bins. Still nothing. Relieved but still on edge, I came back in through the back door, locking it behind me. Just as I turned the deadbolt, I heard a loud rattle on the front door. It was like someone was jiggling the handle, trying to get. My heart slammed against my chest. I rushed to the living room to look through the peephole. The hallway light was off, so I had to squint. There he was, a tall man, maybe in his 40s, wearing dirty jeans and a stained hoodie. His face was partially turned away, but I could see enough to notice that his hair was matted and his eyes were wide with a kind of frantic energy. It felt like time slowed down. I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles ached. He started banging on the door, rocking it on its hinges. I could almost hear Bella's shaky breathing upstairs, even though she had to be half a hallway away. I swallowed hard and yelled through the door that I was calling the police. If he didn't leave immediately. The banging stopped. Silence for a second. Then, to my absolute horror, he tried turning the handle again, using more force. I scrambled for my phone in my back pocket. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. My voice shook when I explained the situation to the operator. She told me to stay calm and stay on the line while officers were dispatched. The man must have heard me say police because he suddenly darted away from the door. I stayed on the call, locked in place, not daring to move. Within minutes, though it felt like forever, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car through the window. By the time the officers came knocking, my hands were shaking so bad I struggled to pull back the deadbolt. When I finally let them in, Bella ran downstairs sobbing into my leg. The police did a thorough search of the yard. One officer eventually shouted that he found someone crouched under a thick patch of bushes near the fence. The man was half hiding, half curled up, glaring at them with a confused expression. They handcuffed him while he mumbled incoherently. I watched from the doorstep, clutching Bella to me, torn between fear and a kind of relief. After they arrested the intruder, one of the officers took my statement. He seemed genuinely sympathetic. Then he told me something that made my stomach twist. The man had escaped from a mental health facility earlier that day, just a few miles away. Apparently he was considered dangerous due to his unpredictable behavior, though he'd never used a weapon before. They were still trying to piece together how he'd ended up in Jonathan's neighborhood. Jonathan got home about an hour later. Visibly alarmed, he knelt down and hugged Bella tight, apologizing to both of us for leaving her that night. Though it wasn't his fault, he was just grateful she was safe. The police left, promising to keep us updated about the man's situation. Bella eventually fell asleep in her dad's room, clutching one of her stuffed animals. As for me, I couldn't shake the image of that man's silhouette by the window. It still gives me chills to remember how certain Bella was that she saw him, and how when I looked he was already gone, waiting for his moment to strike. Even now, years later, whenever I hear a strange tap at a window or sense movement in the yard, my mind jumps back to that night in Denver. The worst part is not knowing exactly why he fixated on that house, or if he was just looking for any open door. Sometimes I wonder if he remembers me and Bella, or if we were just nameless figures in the blur of his mental confusion. Ben and I started our YouTube channel American Urban Explorers about 6 months ago. We'd driven all over Western Pennsylvania, filming deserted factories in Alakepa, the skeletons of old steel mills near Pittsburgh, and crumbling houses we found deep in rural back roads. Viewers love the mystery of these forgotten places, and we loved the thrill of discovery. So when we heard rumors about an abandoned elementary school in a small town called Maplewood, just a quick drive north of the city, we knew we had to check it out. The old school, formerly known as Roosevelt Elementary, stood at the edge of Maplewood, near a set of train tracks that hadn't been used in decades. Its paint was peeling, windows were shattered, and graffiti covered the brick walls. Locals whispered that it was haunted, especially after dark. Some claimed they saw lights flicker inside when no one was there. Others said they heard footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Most people in town avoided the place altogether, but for our channel it was the perfect spot to film an eerie exploration video. One cool autumn afternoon, we parked our car on a quiet side street far from the school gates. The November breeze rustled leaves along the pavement. We packed up our camera gear, checked the batteries, and walked toward the property's fence. Barbed wire zigzagged along the top, but someone had cut a hole near the corner. It looked big enough for us to slip through. I remember pausing for a moment, my heart thumping. Something about the building felt off. The silence around it was almost too heavy, like the school held its breath. Ben, on the other hand, seemed eager. He'd always been the braver one. He gave me a thumbs up, and I steeled myself. We crawled through the gap in the fence and made our way toward the main entrance. The front doors were boarded up, but one of the plywood sheets hung loose, leaving just enough space to squeeze inside. As we stepped into the foyer, a musty smell hit us, mold, rotting wood, and years of neglect. A weak shaft of sunlight slipped through the cracks, illuminating dust motes that danced through the air. I clicked on my flashlight and handed Ben the camera. "Welcome to Roosevelt Elementary," he whispered for the video, panning the camera across the decaying corridor. Our footsteps echoed as we ventured deeper, boots crunching over broken glass and scattered debris. Old lockers lined the walls, their metal doors twisted and rusted. Some were hanging open, revealing crumpled papers, tattered books, and even an old pair of sneakers someone left behind. We passed a faded mural on one wall. It showed smiling kids playing under a bright cartoon sun, but the paint was chipped and black mold crawled over the faces. I felt an uneasy tightness in My chest as I stared at those half-vanished smiles. It was like stepping back into a forgotten piece of history, both fascinating and frightening. After exploring a few of the classrooms, we found the main office. The door was cracked, so we slipped inside. Broken computer monitors and tangled wires littered the floor. A toppled file cabinet spilled papers across what remained of a dirty carpet. Digging through these, Ben found a roster from the late 1990s. It listed teachers' names, class schedules, and a handful of phone numbers. We snapped some photos and kept filming. Our subscribers loved seeing old documents and personal touches, things that made these abandoned places feel real. Then came a noise, a dull thud from somewhere down the hallway. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Ben swung the camera in the direction of the sound, but we saw nothing, just darkness. An uneasy chill skitter up my spine. Maybe it was a loose door slamming in the wind, I thought, but the air was still. No breeze, not even a draft. We should check it out, Ben said, mustering his usual courage. Slowly we crept back into the hallway. The overhead lights, long dead, left everything in shadow. Our flashlight beams flickered against peeling wallpaper. Each step on the old linoleum sent up a hollow echo. Then from around a corner I heard another noise, this time like a scraping against the floor. My stomach twisted. We turned the corner, and there it was, a faint glow coming from a classroom near the end of the hall. Ben glanced at me, eyebrows raised. We edged toward the doorway, the camera still rolling. That's when we saw someone inside. A man stood there, illuminated by the light of a small flashlight, or maybe a lantern. His back was to us, shoulders hunched. He wore a dirty jacket and torn jeans, and his hair was matted. At first I wondered if he was homeless, using the school for shelter, but something about his posture felt wrong, almost too still. Ben took a step forward, quietly clearing his throat to let the stranger know we were there. The man turned around. His eyes were wide, unfocused, like he was seeing something we couldn't. For a second no one spoke, then the man's face twisted into a grin that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. He started moving toward us, slow but deliberate. Ben backed away, camera shaking in his hands. I wanted to call out, but fear clogged my throat. The man kept coming. We turned and bolted down the corridor, our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls behind us. I could hear him running, his footsteps slapping the linoleum in steady pursuit. We reached the foyer and scrambled out the opening in the boarded door, tripping over each other in our haste. Outside the evening light was fading, and the air felt colder than before. We sprinted toward the fence, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. When we got to the hole, Ben slid through first, and I followed, cutting my arm on the jagged edge of the wire. Pain shot through me, but I didn't stop. As soon as we were on the other side, we kept running until we reached the car. We jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Ben looked back at the school, but I refused to turn around. I just wanted to be as far away from that place and that man as possible. For days after, neither of us could sleep well. Our video footage showed only glimpses of the man's shape in the frantic blur. As we ran, we debated whether to upload it at all. In the end, we decided to share a shorter edit, leaving out the most terrifying moments. We titled it Abandoned School Nightmare in Pennsylvania, and it became one of our channel's most watched videos. Local authorities eventually boarded up the school more securely, warning people to stay out. A few months later, the town decided to demolish the building. Ben and I drove by on the day the bulldozers rolled in. We watched from a distance as the ancient brick walls crumbled. It should have felt like closure, yet it only made the memory sharper, like a nightmare that decides to stay with you long after dawn. 2 years ago, on a night in February in Lamar County, Colorado, I was driving to a nightclub, and I was going to meet up with some of my guy friendes to party, because Saturday nights are always for the boys. We did this just about every Saturday unless one of us was busy. I had fun every time, but honestly I sometimes felt pressured to go that Saturday. I stayed most of the day at my grandparents' house, not too far from my own place. After spending a nice day with them, I drove home. At home, I took a quick shower, dressed in nicer clothes, slipped on a pair of fancy shoes, grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, and headed out the front door. I climbed into my SUV, started the engine, and began driving down my familiar road. What I didn't know at that moment was that this would be the last time I ever drove a car. The nearest highway from my house was only about 5 minutes away, so I got on quickly and started cruising at around 70 miles per hour, matching the flow of traffic. After driving about 15 to 20 minutes along the highway, I noticed a police car on the other side of the road. It was facing the opposite direction, parked in the left lane. My first thought was that the officer was waiting for speeding cars to give out tickets. I wish that had been the reality, but sadly it wasn't, since I was driving an SUV. My visibility of the ground immediately in front of me wasn't very good. It was also dark out, and the headlights of oncoming traffic occasionally blinded me for brief moments. I continued driving at the same speed, listening to some music, my mind drifting to thoughts of the evening ahead, when suddenly I felt a heavy impact beneath my vehicle. My heart dropped immediately, and I knew instantly that I'd run over something large, possibly a person. My hands started shaking, and I quickly pulled to the side of the highway, turning on my hazard lights. The moment I fully stopped, I felt panic and dread fill me. I could hardly breathe. Tears flooded my eyes, and I found myself screaming uncontrollably, trembling. I had to do something quickly, but I knew it was impossible to turn around and check the scene myself, because it was a high-speed interstate, and going against the traffic could end tragically. With shaking hands, I called 911, desperate and terrified. The operator calmly told me they already knew about the situation, because an officer on the scene was radioing in what had just happened. I asked her if I should come to the police station, and she said it would be fine. My mind was racing and my heart was pounding painfully in my chest. I struggled to regain composure and drove slowly and carefully to the station. At the police station, I filled out forms, wrote statements, and spoke briefly with an officer who assured me they'd be in contact over the coming days. By the time I left the police station, my phone had several missed calls and texts from my friends wondering where I was. Feeling sick to my stomach, I called my friend Bob, telling him I wouldn't be coming to the club, explaining what had just happened. He was shocked and worried about me, but he understood and told me to take care of myself first. When I finally arrived home, I felt physically and emotionally drained. Sleep overtook me as soon as my head touched the pillow. The following week, I learned from news reports and police interviews more about the person I'd try. His name was Brent Thompson. Brent was 28 years old and had a history of minor legal troubles. He had been pulled over by Deputy Lorenzo Lujan after an officer discovered his vehicle had expired tags. Brent panicked, gave the deputy a fake name, and when confronted about the lie, he ran. Deputy Lujan chased Brent to the edge of the interstate. Deploying his taser, Brent fell onto the pavement seconds before I drove by and tragically ran him over. Brent died at the scene, and the heartbreaking reality of this incident impacted so many people. His family was devastated and filed a lawsuit against the deputy and the police department. After a lengthy investigation, the district attorney concluded that the deputy's actions were lawful. Neither the officer nor I was charged or fined, but the weight of this tragedy still haunted me daily. In the weeks and months after the accident, my life dramatically changed. I became withdrawn and avoided seeing my friends, though they understood. I still felt guilty for abandoning them. I found it impossible to drive again. Every time I approached the driver's seat of a vehicle, I felt sick. Eventually, I stopped even trying. My friends or family drove me places when needed, and when they couldn't, I relied on Uber or buses. I started seeing a counselor to talk through my guilt, and trauma therapy helped me process what happened, but it didn't erase my memories. The details still replayed in my mind: images, sounds, sensations, all vivid, especially late at night. I struggled with nightmares for months, waking in cold sweats, terrified. To cope, I decided to meet Brent's family. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I met his parents and younger sister, explained everything I remembered from that night, and apologized deeply, sincerely and emotionally. Brent's family listened tearfully but forgave me. They acknowledged that Brent had made mistakes that led to that night, but it didn't make losing him any easier. Our meeting was a pivotal moment in my recovery. Although painful, it helped lift some weight off my shoulders knowing Brent's family didn't blame me for the tragic accident. Over time, I slowly rebuilt my life, forming stronger bonds with family and friends, appreciating life's fragility more profoundly. I dedicated time volunteering at local community centers, speaking to teenagers about choices, consequences, and responsibility, hoping to prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies. But despite therapy and the support of loved ones, driving remained impossible for me. I decided to move closer to my workplace, a small office where I worked in customer support, reducing the need to travel. I chosen apartment near a bus stop, and a convenience store simplifying life. Occasionally I felt isolated or frustrated by my inability to overcome the trauma. Fully friends gently encouraged me to start driving again, but the thought alone filled me with anxiety and fear. I explained to them that my life was manageable without driving. They respected my feelings, and eventually the topic faded into the background. The accident changed my perspective profoundly. Every day became a gift. I learned the importance of forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude. Still, the regret and sadness lingered beneath the surface. I visited the site of the accident 1 year after it happened, bringing flowers in Brent's memory. It was an emotional moment. As I stood quietly hearing the distant roar of cars rushing past, I felt sadness but also hope, reflecting on my journey through trauma, guilt, forgiveness, and ultimately healing. Life isn't always predictable or fair. I learned that in the most challenging way possible. The experience taught me valuable lessons about empathy, understanding, and resilience. I never forgot Brent Thompson. He became a constant reminder of life's delicate balance and how quickly everything can change. This is something that happened to me when I was in the 7th grade back in 2016, living in New York City. I had this math teacher named Miss Andre. She wasn't exactly my favorite teacher, as I felt like she wasn't the nicest to me and my class, and she would give us a load of homework that was like homework for someone who was like a senior in college. Anyways, let's get to the point of this story. It was a Friday after school, which was the last day before we had a 1-week break because of the President's Day holidays. I was on my way home, riding on a school bus that I would take to school and home every day. As I was halfway home, the bus stopped at a red light. As we were waiting for the light to turn green, the first saw something that caught my eye. As I was looking out the window listening to music with headphones on to the left of me, I saw my teacher, Miss Andre. She was directly looking at me, and she looked so uptight. I felt so unnerved. I was wondering if she was following the bus, but that was highly unlikely. It probably was just a coincidence. Also, the window was pretty dark, so she might have been unsure if it was me or not. The light then turned green and we drove away. It was weird seeing someone I knew outside of school, considering that New York City is the most populated city in the country. I got home and was able to move past what I saw earlier. The next evening, my family and I, along with my cousins, went to see a Muse concert in New Jersey. Sometime in the concert, Miss Andre appeared again. This time she was on the stage of the Credential Center. She just appeared like magic, looking straight at me with the same facial expression from yesterday. This had to have been a hallucination, because if it wasn't, everyone in the crowd would notice her, and the security guard would escort her off the stage. I felt less uneasy now that I was coming to terms that this isn't real, so I ignored it and continued to have fun, grooving along to the music. That's when she disappeared again. Miss Andre didn't appear again until the Friday of the next week. On that Friday, my family and I went to spend the weekend hiking at Mount Greylock. About 40 minutes into the hike, Miss Andre showed up once again. I wasn't scared anymore. It was getting annoying, and I didn't know how to get rid of this hallucination. I was contemplating my next move. Then an idea flew into my brain, so what I did was I ran to where Miss Andre was, and once I got to where she was standing, she was gone just like the wind. My family looked at me as if I was on drugs or something. My mother asked me if I was right. I came up with this excuse that I had to get some energy out. My mother then said, "Okay then." As she still kept the same facial expression, I didn't want to tell them what I was seeing. I was just way too embarrassed, plus they probably wouldn't have believed me. Anyway, we continued the hike until we reached the top of the mountain. We camped out that night somewhere in the mountains, and then the next night my parents booked an Airbnb to stay at the house that we stayed at. Was fairly big. I got my own bedroom. During the next night, I fell asleep at around 11 p.m. I had a dream about Miss Andre. The dream was about me coming back from the President's week break, and she ordered the entire math class to kill me. I pleaded with them not to kill me and screamed the word "no" over and over. And then a classmate of mine pulled out a pair of scissors from their pocket, and they were sticking it through my heart. Before the scissors could fully pierce my heart, I woke up and I saw Miss Andre like an inch away from my face. She was laughing and screaming like a hyena, while she had such an angry expression on her face, like she was going to kill me. That's when I started screaming and crying for my parents as loud as I could. Both of my parents came rushing into my room and asked what was wrong. I could no longer hide what I have been seeing for the past week. I had to tell them the Truth, I told them that from when the hallucinations started the prior Friday on the school bus, the two other instances, and just minutes ago when I woke up from a nightmare, they looked really scared and concerned. They could tell I was being serious by my crying. My father said he was so sorry, and he asked me, "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Said to him that I thought you guys wouldn't have believed me and thought that I was just crying wolf. My mother then said to me that I could sleep in their room tonight so I could calm down and won't have to be scared anymore, and so I slept in their room for the rest of the night. The next morning, on the drive back home to the city, I had a long discussion with my parents about how I shouldn't return to that school because of what happened this whole week, and I was scared that these hallucinations would continue if I stayed at the school. I also wanted to transfer to another school right away. They seemed too hesitant to give me a straight answer, and they both said that they would come up with a decision in nighttime, and said that I was allowed to miss school tomorrow regardless of what decision they would make when it reached nighttime. They said I was allowed to transfer to another school if I agreed to see a psychologist once every week. I told them no problem. When I started at my new school, my friends kept asking me through social media and text about why I left my old school. I made up a lie saying that my parents wanted me to go to a more well-known school. Believe it or not, they all actually believed that lie. I told them the real reason only stays between me, my family, and my psychologist. Speaking of my psychologist, I was able to talk about all of my problems, including the hallucinations about my old teacher, Miss Andre, that really helped me, and the psychologist was able to prescribe me some medicine to help me through every day to make sure that I was no longer seeing stuff in my head, and it all worked. I never saw Miss Andre with my own eyes ever again, nor did I see any hallucinations again. I still wonder to this day what may have caused that specific hallucination. I guess we'll never know. A few years ago, I worked in private security out of Buffalo, New York. Last October, the agency assigned me to watch over this old half-burnt mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had gone up in flames years ago, and a couple of people reportedly died inside after that. It was abandoned, left as a charred husk with broken windows and a warped roof. Local kids spread rumors about ghosts, but I didn't believe in all that. To me, it was just another night shift. The property sat on a large estate with a tall iron fence around the perimeter. My job was to patrol the grounds a few times each night and make sure no squatters or vandals sneaked in. Pretty straightforward, really. The first few shifts were quiet, just me circling with a flashlight, listening to the wind rustling through dead trees. Then about a week in, I was on duty around 2 a.m. It was colder than usual, and I remember my breath fogging up in the night air. I stopped near the front gate, scanning the upper windows of the mansion. Suddenly I heard something, this sharp, distant cry. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before cutting off. At first I thought it was an animal, but there was something about the pitch, the urgency, that felt too human. I tried shining my flashlight toward the house, but from where I stood I couldn't see anything unusual. Part of me wanted to go in and check, but I'd been told to avoid entering the building alone. It wasn't structurally sound, and my boss insisted we leave it to the police if we heard anything suspicious, so I stayed outside feeling uneasy until sunrise. By morning I convinced myself it must have been some stray cat or a trick of the wind. Over the next few days I couldn't shake the memory of that scream. Each night I found myself walking closer to the entrance, listening more carefully. Then on a Wednesday I spotted something that stopped me cold. While circling the rear of the property, I glanced up at the top floor. A faint light flickered behind the soot-stained glass, like someone was moving around with a flashlight. That shouldn't have been possible. There was no electricity in that building, and the upper levels were essentially gutted by fire. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, watching as the light flickered in and out of the window. Then a figure appeared, just a silhouette, but a person. They moved slowly, almost swaying before stepping away from view. My stomach lurched. It was 1:30 in the morning, and that place was supposed to be empty. This time curiosity overrode caution. I radioed in to let dispatch know I was investigating. I climbed the creaking porch stairs and pushed the front door open. The inside smelled of ash and old damp wood. My flashlight beam skimmed over scorched walls, sagging floorboards, and piles of debris. Every step echoed in the darkness. I moved through a couple of charred rooms, coughing as dust filled the air. Then I heard a soft rustling behind me. My skin prickled. I swung the flashlight around. Nothing, just a tattered curtain drifting near a shattered window. Trying to calm myself, I kept walking deeper into the house. That's when I felt it, this unmistakable presence behind me, like someone hovering just out of reach. I spun around. Flashlight trembling in my hand. Standing there was a man in a white gown, not a glowing ghost or anything bizarre, more like a hospital gown, worn and grimy, just hanging off his frame. His face was half hidden by the gloom, but I could see the whites of his eyes. Instinct took over. I bolted, practically crashing into the hallway walls as I dashed back the way I came. I don't remember breathing or thinking, I just remember the pounding in my chest. The front door was still half open, so I barreled out, nearly stumbling off the porch steps outside. I scrambled for my phone and called the police. I kept looking back, half expecting that man to appear in the doorway, but he never did. The cops arrived with a couple of squad cars. They looked skeptical when I told them my story, like they'd heard this kind of thing before. Still, they humored me, and we waited until daylight to do a thorough search. I followed them in along with an older detective named Callahan, who seemed more patient than the rest. We inspected the rooms I'd walked through, but nothing was immediately obvious. After hours of poking around, one of the officers found a concealed door behind a collapsed bookcase leading down to the basement. The staircase looked newer than the rest of the house, as if it had been reinforced. The smell that hit us was enough to make my eyes water, a mix of mold, damp concrete, and something else I couldn't place down. There we found 3 men alive, breathing, and startled by our arrival. They were wanted in connection with several robberies in the area. One of them lunged at the cops, but he was quickly restrained. Tucked away in the corner was a terrified man tied to a chair, gagged and bound. His face was gaunt, and he had bruises on his arms. It hit me then, that screaming I heard on my first night probably belonged to him. He'd been stuck in this basement pleading for help, while I stood just yards away outside. The police arrested the 3 men on the spot and freed the hostage as they escorted the criminals upstairs. I noticed that none of them wore a white gown. They all had jeans and sweatshirts. I asked the detective if maybe they had an accomplice who got away. He couldn't say for sure. One of the suspects admitted they were using the abandoned house as a hideout, but he wouldn't talk about anyone wearing white. I still think about that moment when I turned and saw the figure was it, the hostage in a makeshift outfit. Did I mistake something in the dark, or was there someone else lurking, someone who didn't want to be found? I'm not sure I'll ever have a concrete answer, but whenever I drive by the place, there's yellow tape around it. Now I remember those eyes watching me in the darkness, and I wonder if the true story of what happened in that house goes way deeper than we'll ever know. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden. When we were on a road trip, I'm Anna, and my parents were going to make a domestic trip, and we were having an 8-hour drive from home. The plan was that we would visit a theme park and stay at a campsite, but we haven't booked any. The day came and we arrived at the city where the theme park was, but we were going to go there the upcoming day, so we would have to sleep in our tents we brought with us in our car. My dad looked up a nearby campsite on the internet, and we found a good one really close. My dad called the camp's phone number, but unfortunately that day was the same day as a big soccer tournament, so there were no space left for us since we needed to make sure to book before, and there were a lot of people there. My dad called around and we did not find any campsites with a good price and near the theme park, so our only choice was to find a camping spot in nature. We set up the GPS for the closest parking in the forest, so we didn't have to pay any parking fines. We found a spot in a nature reserve at the time we arrived. There were people there to ask if it was okay to set up our tents here and if it was a good place to stay. A woman that were hiking told us it was a good place to sleep and no parking attendants, so we made our decision to sleep in a small and lonely gravel parking lot. We were surrounded by forest, and a 10-minute walk away was a beach. At first we thought we wanted to sleep at the beach, but something told me that it would be better if we set up our tents in the parking lot. When we first got out of the car and was going to set up our shelter for the night, I noticed a lonely car further away from us in the parking lot. I thought it looked in a bad condition and I saw there were no people in it, but I thought it was strange because now it was at the evening, so there were no people out at the beach or hiking in the woods by this time. But I thought no more about it. I helped my parents set up our tents. My parents were sleeping in one tent and me, Anna, in the other. While both of the tents were next to each other close, we were finally done struggling to build it, so I and Anna made it cozy while watching YouTube and eating snacks. The time was around 11 p.m. We were going to try to sleep in a decent time so we didn't have to be tired for the upcoming day. After a good time of eating snacks and laughing, we finally were going to sleep now around 12 a.m. At this time my parents were asleep in their own tent. We were on our phones scrolling some TikTok before going to bed when we suddenly heard a metal sound in the parking lot. I heard it was a shovel that was thrown down on the gravel ground, Anna, and I got really scared and jumped. We asked ourselves what that sound was. We chose to stay silent and just listen to what was next. Since none of us dared to peek out of the tent window, it was coming from the same direction as the abandoned car was parked. We heard that what I was thinking was a shovel was thrown in the trunk of the car, and then the person throwing it was slamming the trunk shut. While sitting in silence, we heard the car speed off fast like it were trying to get away fast. Me and Anna was both scared and confused. I texted a friend from a nearby city about where we were staying, and he told me that the beach we were close to was a dangerous place and many organized criminals have been doing many illegal things there. We did not know any of this before. When my friend told me that, I felt cold and I got really creeped out. There was around 10 minutes of silence since the car sped off. Anna and I were silent and had calmed ourselves down a little when we heard the loudest blood-curdling scream ever from a male. Anna and I were horrified, and I texted my mom that we heard a loud scream from the woods. I woke her up by calling her phone so she would answer my text. Neither one of my parents had heard the scream because they were asleep, so she told me it was probably nothing serious things going on at this point. I was so scared and I couldn't think of any normal situations a person would scream like this. Anna and I crawled under the blankets, scared of not knowing what would happen next. The minutes felt like hours while we were not being able to sleep. Even though it was midnight, we were so tired, so we tried to sleep even though of the screams and the thought of the speeding car. It was dead silent now. My blood was suddenly turned to ice when I heard footsteps walking around our tent. Silent, stealthy footsteps. Anna and I sat up in fear. I laid down my phone so the person outside didn't see the screen light up the tent. I heard my own pulse, and my heart was beating so fast. There was no logical reason for this person to walk around our tents in the middle of the forest. Anna and I were sitting frozen in fear under our blankets while hearing the person walk first around our tent, then move to my parents, and then walk around our car next to our tents. I heard the person stop outside and look at our tents. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard the car from earlier come back. The headlights of the cars lit up our tents. So Anna and I lay down from our sitting position fast, so they wouldn't see us sitting, knowing we had heard and seen them. I gathered my courage to peek out of the small window, and the car door slammed shut and they drove off again. I felt relieved that the person was gone now. I had an overview of the road we sped away from. Around 5 minutes later, I heard another car approaching fast. I looked out and I saw it was a police car speeding down the same way the old car was going. Nothing more happened after that. Me and my friend were still shaken up by the situation, so we wanted to sit in the car and lock the doors so we would feel more safe. I was awake until around 5 a.m. just watching out at the forest if there was any more things that were going to happen. Anna fell asleep in the seat next to me. After around an hour in the car, we went back to our tent and we fell asleep of pure exhaustion. We woke up around 9 a.m. both tired and exhausted. I told my mom what we heard, and she had heard the footsteps too, but when the person was next to my parents' tent, there was heavy breathing from the person like you would hear in a phone call in a scary movie. My mom got scared too, but my dad was asleep the whole time, so we had to tell the story to him, and we immediately packed our things and the tents, leaving the place as fast as we could. None of us wanted to be there for one more minute. We had a good time at the theme park, but later that evening I searched about that forest we were staying in, and not a long time before us there was a murder of a man there, stabbed to death in debt to a gang, and 2 more men were missing from that exact beach and have still not been found. So I thought to myself, what if the person walking around our tent was a dangerous person looking to see if there were any people there awake witnessing what was happening? And I got chills afterwards just by the thought what could have happened. After days I still think, who made those screams and why were they using a shovel in the middle of the night in a forest and the police cars are chasing right after? I had always been fascinated by ghost stories, my friends, and I love to share spooky tales during our sleepovers. One night we decided to take things up a notch. We planned to visit the abandoned graveyard at the edge of our small town in western New York. It was rumored to be haunted by spirits dating back to the early 1800s, and nobody dared go there after dark. Being young and curious, we thought it would be fun. It was a chilly October evening when we set out just a few days before Halloween. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange before disappearing entirely. We rode our bikes past rows of old Victorian-style homes, eventually leaving the glow of the street lights behind. As we neared the outskirts, a wooden sign half hidden by overgrown weeds marked the entrance to the property. Oakwood Cemetery, established in 1812. The sign was so faded that the letters were barely legible. The cool night air brushed against our cheeks as we parked our bikes near a gnarled oak tree. My friend Becca checked her phone's flashlight while Jake tried to steady his shaky hands. I could feel my excitement and fear mingling in the pit of my stomach. The graveyard gate was wrought iron, its intricate patterns rusted and bent in places. It loudly creaked when Jake pushed it open, echoing in the stillness. We slipped inside, stepping onto a path lined with gravestones that leaned at odd angles. Some headstones bore names from centuries past, their inscriptions worn down by wind and rain. Others stood upright, surprisingly well preserved, with elegant carvings of angels or ivy up above. The moon hung like a silver lantern, illuminating the scene just enough for us to see our surroundings in a ghostly glow. We followed the path deeper into the cemetery, passing weathered statues that seemed to watch us with lifeless eyes. A few yards ahead, an ancient maple towered over a cluster of graves, its knotted branches stretched out like twisted arms, casting strange shadows that danced with every breeze. We tried cracking small jokes, hoping to break the tension, but the silence around us felt too heavy, almost like the earth was holding its breath. At the center of the cemetery stood a crumbling mausoleum. Its marble walls were cracked and fallen leaves had gathered along the steps. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In Memoriam the Whitaker Family, 1839. Stories around town claimed that the Whitakers had perished in a tragic fire, and their spirits never found rest. We exchanged uneasy glances. This was the place that local legend said was the most haunted of all. Curiosity got the better of us. We approached the mausoleum with hesitant steps, Becca's flashlight guiding the way. The heavy door was slightly ajar, revealing a dark space within. I could smell damp stone and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers left from a long ago funeral. We pushed the door open a bit wider and entered. Hearts pounding inside. The air felt heavier, as though we'd stepped underwater. Our flashlights revealed stone walls covered in a thin layer of moss, and a few cracked marble slabs where coffins might have once rested. Cobwebs hung from the corners, shifting with every motion we made. Then Jake froze, his beam of light fixed on something in the far corner. A figure stood there, motionless at first, dressed in a long tattered white garment. My heart thundered so loudly I could hear my pulse. The figure had a hood or veil obscuring its face, making it impossible to see any features. We all stood still, too petrified to speak or even breathe loudly. Suddenly the figure lifted its head. Two faintly glowing eyes seemed to reflect our flashlight beams, piercing the darkness. A soft rasping sound filled the silence like a hushed moan. It was enough to jolt us out of our paralysis. "Go," Becca hissed, her voice trembling. We turned and bolted for the door, shoving it open as the figure took a halting step forward. I nearly tripped over a broken slab as I scrambled out, my heart thumping in my ears. Outside, the night air felt shockingly cold against my flushed face. We sprinted back down the path, feet pounding the earth, our flashlights bouncing wildly across the headstones. Branches scraped my arms as we tore past the old maple tree. I could sense something behind us, whether it was our imaginations or the figure from the mausoleum. I couldn't be sure. The dark silhouettes of the graves blurred into a single ominous mass, and I found myself holding my breath, half expecting a ghostly hand to grab my shoulder. Finally, we saw the rusted gate looming ahead. We flung it open and dashed out onto the roadside, nearly collapsing in a heap beside our bikes. My lungs burned, and for a moment I couldn't find the words to speak. Jake's face was pale and Becca's eyes were wide with terror. None of us dared to look back toward the graveyard. Slowly we got on our bikes and pedaled as fast as we could, leaving Oakwood Cemetery behind. We didn't stop until we were back under the glow of street lamps in town, where the sounds of distant cars and the hum of electricity felt comfortingly normal when we finally had the nerve to speak. We all asked the same question: what did we see back there? None of us had a real answer. We only knew that the stillness, the hooded figure, and those eerie eyes were unlike anything we'd experienced before.